Okay, I think we'll get started. We'll start with the introductions and welcome to everybody. One of the things, I'm Vince Rogalski, by the way, and I'm chairman of the STAC and also chairman of the Gunnison Valley Transportation Planning Region. And so as I call upon your area and you're introducing yourself, if you're new to STAC, tell us a little bit about yourself. Okay, so we'll go first. Dr. Cog.
Good morning, Nick Williams, Denver Regional Council of Governments representative, and I guess I'm old to STAC, but still excited to be here.
Good.
Ron Papsdorf, Dr. Cog staff.
All right, Central Front Range.
Dick Elsner, Park County Commissioner and Vice Chair of Central Front Range.
Okay, Eastern TPR.
Yeah, Gary Beatty, Eastern TPR.
Grand Valley.
Dana Brosig, Grand Valley MPO Director, and I'm joined with Rachel Peterson, our Transportation Planner. And Cody is not joining us today, our Chair.
Okay. Gunnison Valley, and I introduced myself as chairman of the STAC. Is Roger on? No, okay. Intermountain.
Brian Pettit with the Intermountain TPR.
North Front Range.
Yes, hi, John Mallow, Loveland City Council. I'm also the chairman of the MPO. Also on the phone is Suzette Mallet. She's our executive director of the MPO.
Northwest.
Hi, Heather Sloop, still here, Northwest TPR Chair and STAC Vice Chair.
Okay, Pikes Peak.
Holly Williams, Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, and John Leosados, also Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments.
Hi, everybody. I'm a Sagittarius.
Okay, Pueblo area.
Good morning, Eva Cookleon, MPO Manager, and I believe we have Wendy Pettit, who's our staff, and her alternate, Greg George, both from Trumbull County. You can introduce yourself, though.
Okay, San Luis Valley.
Hey, Vince, real quick.
Yeah.
Brian Serkvenik is here for Northwest TPR. He is also the Vice Chair of our TPR.
Hey, guys.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I'm having computer problems this morning.
Okay, San
Greg,
Luis.
do you want to?
San Luis
Greg
Valley.
get to introduce himself?
Yeah, good morning. This is Vern Hersink. I'm the Vice Chair of the San Luis Valley TPR. Also have Hugh Halleck here. He's our TPR facilitator.
Okay, South Central.
John Galusha, Huerfano County Commissioner and Chair of the South Central TPR, also on as our COG Director, TPR Rep Brian Blasi.
Okay, Southeast.
Good morning. This is Stephanie Gonzalez with the Southeast TPR. Thank you.
Southwest.
Good morning, Jim Candelaria here with Southwest TPR Vice Chair. Good morning, all.
Okay, Upper Front Range.
Hi, Kevin Ross, Will County Commissioner, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Upper Front Range TPR. And we also got Elizabeth Relford on here, our executive.
Okay, let's see, Southern Youth. Southern Ute. Okay, Ute Mountain. John Cater. Okay, FTA Emma Belmont. Did I miss anybody? Okay, let's see. We have about 43 people online, so we've got a big audience. The first item on the agenda then is the approval of the January meeting minutes. Were sent out in the packet. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Holly Williams.
Is there a second?
Second, Gary Beatty.
Are there any corrections or additions? Hearing none, is there anybody that disagrees with approving the minutes of the January STAC meeting? Okay, we'll consider them approved. Okay, next item on the agenda is an update of current events. Herman.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This will be brief. First, let you know what's on the commission agenda here in a couple of weeks. Besides our usual budget conversations, the commissioners specifically asked for a rest area update. So we're going to do that this month. They also specifically asked for a update on our federal discretionary grant applications. I think coming on the heels of two really successful applications in just the last couple of weeks, where we got some interstate reconstruction on I-76 and project down in Region 5 on US 160 that together was over $80 million. They want to talk about our success and how we choose those projects and things like that. We are doing the 1601 interchange request that's on I-76 and Weld County Road 8. If ever there was a question about whether DRCOG could be nimble, we were about a month delayed on our interchange workshop with commission. We had hoped to get it there in January, and DRCOG pushed a lot of their processes by a month to help accommodate us and our schedule. So thanks a lot, Ron and DRCOG, for making that happen. We really appreciate that. That's a big deal for us. And then we're going to get started on discussing program distribution overview. So all of the work that you all did in 2023, the commission is getting ready to tackle. But with 6 new commissioners, they first need to understand what the programs are before they start deciding how much money goes to each CDOT region for each program. So we'll be doing a program distribution overview. And then for those of you that have been around for a while, you know that every 2 or 3 years, Hinsdale County and Lake City come to the commission for permission to run off-highway vehicles on a small portion of their state highway in order to complete a full loop for off-highway vehicles. So that's coming up again this year, and then we'll have an audit review committee meeting. So that's basically the commission agenda. And then I'll also say that you've probably noticed that I got the rules for the planning process and the TPRs filed with the Secretary of State's office on Monday. I very quickly got emails from folks saying I don't have a good sense of direction, which is absolutely right, because I mixed up where the Eagle County portion that's RAFTA and the Eagle County portion that's the Eagle Valley RTA. So yesterday I refiled the rules with the correction and sent that out to everybody. So we have that corrected. We do have rulemaking hearings on March 6th and March 11th. So please register for those, one or both. And public comment is also open. You can find all that information on our website. So that's my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Herman? Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the Transportation Commission report. In your packet is a copy of the commission meeting minutes notes. And so one of the things they talked about initially is a budget. And it seems like every meeting that the commission has, it talks about the budget. and how things are going, and trying to get this ready for approval for next year. And it seems almost unbelievable that we're talking about next year already, and when we're barely into this calendar year, but we're talking about the fiscal year budget. And so they proposed a number of different actions, and that's listed in your packet. And so I won't go over those. One of the biggest things that I think is most interesting is going over asset management. And they had a report about asset management. You remember, asset management is sort of a different pot of money, and dealing with the state of transportation in the state. And they highlighted a number of different issues. And, you know, they look at 12 key issues or assets: bridges, tunnels, walls, culverts, pavement, rest areas, buildings, geohazard, ITS, fleet, traffic signals, and maintenance level of service. You know, one of the things that helps guide some of this stuff is PD14, in terms of setting levels of where we want to see that. And the big thing that affects the levels is how much money is put to that particular issue. And that's where the budget comes in. The next item they talked about is planning. You know, this is going to be a big planning year, calendar year, in terms of working on the long-range plan, the 2050 plan, and also the 10-year plan. And we can't forget transit. And transit is a big issue. And one of the things that is included in transit is rail. And with the increase in the federal budget, our Front Range Rail has a good chance at a lot of money. Hopefully we'll get a lot of money, and that'll become more of a real thing. The thing of it is, when we talk about Front Range Rail, we also talk about Mountain Rail, which is from Denver to Craig, and how that's going. And, you know, one of the big issues there is what's going to happen with the Moffett Tunnel, and what's going to happen with that lease. And then Mountain Rail and State Rail. You know, we got a lot of tracks that are still left, and freight meets the need of a lot of our municipalities around the state. But we'd also like to see some more transit in terms of rail, in terms of passenger rail. And that's going to be a long time coming, with Front Range Rail, passenger rail coming out first. So was discussed. At the regular meeting, they passed all the resolutions that were being addressed there. Let's see, a couple of them. Let's see. It's always a disposal of properties. And then we have the budget, more resolution on the adoption of amendment to the budget, and proposed resolution on I-70 Mountain Express lanes, and interagency financing agreement related to Wells Fargo loan. You know, our people are always interested in trying to readjust how the loans work and whether we can save any money on interest. And so that's a discussion that happens every so often in terms of what CDOT is doing to save money. We had reports of all of the commissioners, and then let's see. I think that's pretty much all the rest of the discussion on the amendments. It all was followed by let's see, the let's see, bridge and rail, no, excuse me, bridge and tunnel. And they had a little thing, they don't talk too much about anything in terms of getting their budget approved and moving forward with a number of different issues. So questions? Okay, so we've had a little adjustment in our agenda. And so instead of going to TPR reports, we're going to go to the state freight and passenger rail plan and an overview.
So I can go ahead and kick things off while the presentation's getting pulled up. We appreciate the ability to go a little earlier in the agenda. We have our monthly transit meeting this morning as well. So the ability to go sooner lets us get onto that call as well. But here today to give you an overview of the state freight and passenger rail plan. This is a plan that CDOT maintains. It's required by the Federal Rail Administration, and we have been updating that plan. It's a document that positions Colorado to be able to take advantage of federal grants. And as Vince alluded to in his report, the federal bipartisan infrastructure law did include $102 billion for rail funding. So it's a great time to make sure that this plan is current and ready to go because we would love to see Colorado compete well for those funds nationally. As a reminder, this is not a project list. It's a strategic high-level guiding document. It inventories all the state rail planning efforts statewide, outlines our goals, and the team will get you into the details of that. So I will hand it over to Paul from here.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Great introduction, great overview of the plan. And I think one of the most important sort of words to keep in mind as we're going through this plan is inventory. So we are primarily inventorying, our rail assets throughout the state with this, and it enables us to be able to continue to pursue other plans like the ones that were referenced in Vince's opening remarks in Front Range Rail and Mountain Rail. So as Kate said, my name is Paul Desrocher. I'm the director of the Division of Transit and Rail. I've been in this position for about 6 months now. And so I'm actually going to be supported by Cody Hedges. He's our rail planner here, and he's going to be kind of following me in this presentation, so we can jump into the next slide. Okay, so I think Kay covered a good portion of this, but just to reiterate, one of the most important aspects of the freight and passenger rail plan is that it enables CDOT to be able to pursue future grant and financing opportunities through the federal government. So as many people know, the IIJA bill was passed a couple of years ago in the federal government, and it created that $102 billion that Kay mentioned. And so those funds are obviously going to be very important if the state of Colorado wants to pursue implementation of rail along Front Range, Mountain Rail, or other corridors in the future. And that is a limited time funding opportunity. And so getting this plan approved and basically completed enables CDOT to be able to pursue those federal funds. So that's, I would say, the most important aspect of this. But it really also provides an opportunity for CDOT to coordinate with several key partners, whether they be Class 1 railroads, MPOs, local jurisdictions, and obviously the public at large. And so this planning process has occurred over the last year and really provided CDOT an opportunity to engage and strategize with those partners. Next slide. Some of the high-level goals here that you'll see in some of our strategies. A lot of this, I will say, this plan is an update from a 2018 plan. So we consider this plan to be somewhat of a light update. So a lot of these goals and strategies are basically the same. If those of you who may have been around for the 2018 plan, they're pretty similar. The main thing that we see different is down here on the lower left, where you see advanced passenger rail. That used to be advanced front range rail. Obviously, we're pursuing other corridors besides just front range at this point. So we've kind of generalized that, but continuing to focus on safety and security, expansion and improvement of our system, making connectivity and mobility improvements for the public, preservation, asset management is a huge component, and economic vitality. So these are some of the driving principles that we pursued as we went through this plan. Next slide. And here you see essentially just an inventory of our both freight and passenger rail network. So this includes not only freight, but also passenger rail, and includes locally operated rail, such as we have here in the Denver metro region, being RTD light rail and commuter rail, Amtrak services, as well as scenic railroads that we see throughout the state. So again, just trying to kind of have a clear inventory of what assets we have available to give us an idea about where we can potentially expand and improve upon. And there's quite a few sort of statistics here on the right. I will mention that a link to the plan is included in your packet if you'd like to get a sort of more detailed understanding about what assets we have in the state of Colorado. Next slide. And then I alluded to this already, but I think one of the more important outcomes of this plan was CDOT's ability to engage with our rail partners. So you see a lot of those listed here, locally RTD, front range passenger rail, some of the class 1 railroads and BNSF and UP, Dr. Cog, the counties, some of these other smaller operators, as well as special interest groups, advisory groups, Colorado Rail Passenger Association, Rocky Mountaineer, who operates, I'd say, kind of a tourist service between Denver Union Station and Glenwood Springs. That's been a wildly successful service, and yeah, really provided us an opportunity to engage with those folks. Next slide. And here is where I'm going to pass it off to Cody. So Cody's going to help really provide some more delineation in terms of how this plan differs from the 2018 plan. So go ahead, Cody.
All right. Thank you, Paul, and hello, STAC. I'm going to, as Paul said, go over some things about the differences and the changes and updates. And so we'll start with passenger rail. Obviously, there's the elephants in the room. The front range passenger rail is now less of an idea as it was in 2018, and more of it's being developed into a service development plan, and we were accepted into the corridor ID program, which is a funding stream from the FRA that was approved through the IIJA, the infrastructure law that Paul talked about earlier. And that guarantees us funding up and through what's called implementation. So it's like the environmental process functionally and early design, such as 30%, if you're familiar with that. And then, of course, the creation of the passenger rail district, which was from 2021, which is where that discussion around the tax comes in, and the vote towards that tax. The plan does not talk about that vote. It is just simply one of the big things that comes from that being implemented, and is the district's creation that is discussed in the plan. The other obvious situation here that was recent is Mountain Rail. That was October. We received $5 million from the TC to do a service development plan like the Front Range Passenger Rail is doing. We're currently just starting it for the Mountain Rail corridor, which is going to be looking primarily towards that Denver to Craig route, as the chair mentioned earlier. Of course, there's Burnham Yard. For some of you that remember, that was being purchased a few years ago. That is in coordination with the P3 office of DPA, RTD, Denver, and CDOT, because there's different parties involved there, and what options and where that would go. Southwest Chief Rehabilitation and a through car study. That one is more around the lines of the Southwest Chiefs back in 2014. So we were discussing this in the 2018 plan. That's when that rehabilitation started. And now the final 30 or so miles are being constructed through a RAISE grant, which if you've heard BUILD or Tiger grants, RAISE grant is just the new name for those. So if you're a member back from the 2018 plan, you would have heard a different name. It's the same idea of a funding stream. It's just changed because when federal laws change, they change names of things occasionally. And then the FRA long distance study, that is through FRA for Amtrak's long distance routes. Of course, ours are the Zephyr that goes through Denver, of course, and the Southwest Chief, which I just alluded to in East Colorado, Southwest Chief, Southeast Colorado. So that's more of the passenger side. The freight side, you have commodity movements. That's really the biggest change that's been happening in terms of the updates to the freight, because coal traffic in particular has been dropping quite significantly. That's actually, as I mentioned Mountain Rail earlier, why that is starting to pick up steam, if we want to talk about a rail kind of thing. But anyways, it's picking up steam towards the Mountain Rail corridor because Craig's coal traffic is starting to drop. And so how do you look towards things such as just transition for a community such as Craig, such as Hayden, when something such as the coal industry, which is driving a lot of the employment in that area, is starting to go away. Not by any fault of Craig or Hayden, but just because that's the direction the state and the country is going in certain movements. And so how do you do that? One of those ways might be passenger rail connectivity to other parts of the state in a more options to different connections to the state. And through that also, we have emphasis that through freight safety and equity, and what that looks like is further and more intense discussions with the freight railroads, particularly the Class 1s, BNSF and UP, and that is driven largely by the bipartisan infrastructure law, because that law has $102 billion up and through 2026 approximately. Is because they have advanced appropriations for that money. And the way that a lot of the freight industries can tap into that is they have to go through government entities to get it. And so that is where those discussions with us come into play. And that is helping us with those discussions with both Mountain Rail and Front Range Passenger Rail, Moffett Tunnel, all of those, they all start to come together in terms of those discussions because they're being led from the front end by the funding streams that the federal government has given us. So if we go to the next slide, part of that funding is leading to things such as, that overlap's interesting, is because we're trying to keep this trajectory of going back to where the ridership was before the pandemic. So that 307,000 is 2019, pre-pandemic, of course. And then as you can see, we are slowly going back up. The number for 2020, if you're curious, is 122,000. So it is significantly lower because of that pandemic impact. And we are slowly starting to increase. So 197,000 for Amtrak was from 2022. That's the last numbers we have, just because of delay in getting those numbers. You can't get them in a 2-month period. But we're looking using that funding to increase or can maintain this upward trend towards going back to ridership expectations that we saw in the past. Not necessarily trends on how people move, but the ridership numbers that we're looking at by diversifying how those schedules start to look. So if we go to the next slide, we start to see what sort of policy issues that we're concerned with. Again, this is a light update from the 2018 plan, so a lot of these look the same, but there are a lot of changes that are coming along as well. Of course, funding, I've been talking about that for the last couple of minutes. We have this short-term opportunity from the federal government and the IIJA, because quite frankly, after that runs out, unless it's reapproved, which is questionable, we still have long-term federal funding, but those are back at levels that we used to see, which is kind of why we're at this moment where we're starting to talk about building them now or getting the funding for them, because long term it's hard to get enough funds to build some of these projects. Of course, there's land use and development. We had the last legislative session, they were trying to talk about those that didn't pass. How they're going to re-implement those is up to the legislature, obviously, but it's something that is important to the rail branch as we follow it and go along with what's going on. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that coordination and joint planning comes from railroad operators and, of course, the regions as well. because we're looking at leveraging those federal grant opportunities to say, if you want the money, we want these projects. How do we work together to get these projects to work for both us, the public, and for the freight railroads? It's not a win-lose situation. It's very much, how is this a win-win situation for everybody? And of course, safety is front of mind in terms of how we use those dollars. And part of that comes with passenger rail in terms of those improvements are going to come along certain corridors, and passenger rail is one of those drivers for going to a corridor, improving the class of railroads, which will inherently improve the class of at-grade crossings, potentially some separated crossings. It depends on how that works out in terms of where it makes most sense and what's feasible. So if we go to the next slide, we start to look at what sort of things are in this plan, and we've tried to break them out into different areas. It's still a lot of words, I know, but we're going to kind of walk through the top. Of course, we have our Front Range Mountain and then RTD. We start looking at the Mountain Corridor and the Front Range Corridor. They're both in the middle of that service development plan. Mountain Corridor at the beginning, Front Range in the middle. And those are doing the same thing. Where do these stations go that makes sense? What is the governance structure? What do the operator looks like? What is the rolling stock? Rolling stock is a fancy word for the trains. And then what is the ridership projection, finances, and what kind of improvements to the track? And that's where that safety comes in. Do we need in order to implement these programs? And then, of course, the Southwest Chief and the Zephyr, we start looking at a lot of this discussion with the freight railroads. If you look at the Zephyr, the brush sub is that line that the California Zephyr follows northeast from the BNSF route of Denver. And then the Southwest Chief, of course, they're finishing those last 30-ish miles of that bigger project from starting in 2014. And so how do we continue to work with the freight railroads in terms of grade separations, bridge replacements, and realignments in order to really leverage as much money as we can while we have the funding? And a lot of that does come into certain things such as adding sidings, spurs, and improvements to those, and then positive train control, which is a safety mechanism that is required for passenger rail. And so if we go to the next slide, we'll give you an update of what's going on with next steps. Right now, we went to a workshop with the TC last month. It is February 1st. So last month, we were with the TC workshop. This month, we'll be going back to the TC for a resolution for approval. At that point, it'll go to the FRA for their acceptance. So review and acceptance. That's why we put winter. FRA is very much swamped in a lot of ways. We've been discussing things with them to let them know it's coming, but how long it takes, they have up to 90 days. We don't expect it to take that long. And that is going to be going right after we have that approval with the TC resolution in February. And of course, after that, this is setting us up, as Paul mentioned at the very beginning, for those funding streams, because back in 2008, these plans were implemented as a way to set you up for certain federal grants as you move forward. And with that, we'll go to the next slide and finish it up. Say if anybody has any questions or discussions, we're open to those at this time. Thank you.
Questions? Gary.
Yeah, was wondering if you looked at renewable energy out in my district or my area, my TPR. We have a lot of wind farms, more being built, and then we're starting to get to the age that some of these will be repowered and they'll probably be replacing blades and the nacelles, which each one of those pieces requires usually at least 3 vehicles to transport them by road. And they're oversized, overweight, so they put extra strain on the other systems. There's one on the short line along I-70, Class 3 railroad. There's a site that's been considered for doing a rail siding that they could bring in blades and then take out the old blades for recycling or sending them off rather than having to use our highway system. Was there any consideration through this plan on looking at renewable and agricultural needs and how we could improve commodity flows and things on trains, trying to get it off of the highways with the higher fuel usage and all that requires?
So this goes back to the idea of the just transition, right? A lot of this does come into the idea of as certain commodities shift and change, what are the projects of the freight railroads? And when I say freight, I mentioned BNSF and UP because they're the class 1s. So for those that don't know, there's class 1, 2, and 3. It's your operating revenues. And so UP and BNSF are the biggest. Class 2s are regional. It's like, I think $1999, and then they adjust for inflation, but it's between 30-ish million and 400 million a year for regionals. That's your class 2. And then those short lines are the ones that are those final mile connections to the mainline roads. And we discussed with our freight partners, all of them from class 1s to class 3, what projects they had in mind. And so when those discussions of connecting to the main line on those certain types of projects along spur lines come up, we rely on our freight partners to say, look, this is what we're looking for, and this is what we want to do, because for them, it's going to be a business practice that makes sense. And if they have the funding available through the federal government, through IIJA, then they need to go through us to help with that. And that's why we're reaching out and talking to them. And so when we see a project like that, it would be something that comes of interest. A certain project doesn't come to mind for me because it's the whole state. And so kind of keeping them all in mind is some slip away. And so whether that was specifically discussed, can't speak to directly, but it's the kind of project we look to, I think, that aligns with the goals that we're looking for in this plan. And ultimately, that's the idea of the plan, is setting up the goals to say, we want to enhance safety, security, and sustainability and moving forward. And so we can say, when we're making decisions moving forward, this is the goals set forward in the plan, and therefore that makes the most sense. So if that idea came into a discussion, it would, I think, fall in line with the goals set forth in the plan.
Yeah, I guess that falls into kind of my follow-up is there wasn't any reach out to the TPRs to get any feedback from the cities and counties and the planning partners in each of the regions on ideas or things that they see in their community. It looks like it was just the rail industry that was involved and the transit part, and there wasn't really an outreach to all the other broad transportation that we see through our local planning organizations to help bring some of those up to the discussion, and also to open up that dialogue between the local communities on what they see businesses needing and what the railroads are saying they want to do.
So
I think these planning opportunities, we need to leverage to help get the local communities to communicate better with the railroads, because that's always been some issue for that whole issues on a statewide basis, is the local communities having dialogue with the railroad in some format. And CDOT has tried to play a role of improving those, and it feels like we've kind of lost some of that again, of getting that local input connected to the rail industry. So I'd encourage that to be brought forward in the future, to include the TPRs, at least letting them know of other meetings that they could participate in if they have issues to bring to the railroads.
Certainly, yeah. We definitely went through the Freight Advisory Council, and we went through like Colorado, we went through the MPOs. So we did meet with the public sector. Of course, this wasn't just freight railroad only, because it is public and freight. We want to bring both of them together. So it was definitely not a situation where we ignored our public partners throughout the process. But yeah, ways to tie in the TPRs more specifically in the future. If you miss the meetings for these, then I think that's something that's a valuable input. Yeah.
Okay, Brian.
Hi, this might not be an answerable question, but I know the lease on the Moffett Tunnel is up January 6th of next year. Do we have a status update on that, or is it still under negotiation?
It's still under negotiation. And that is because it's under negotiation. John Putnam is the lawyer handling that for the rail team. And so he's the point for that, and really can't talk too much in specifics, at least my understanding, because that involves delicate conversations with UP, and DOLA is involved with that process as well, because technically they own it on behalf of the state, and then John's help leading that as the transportation expert. But in terms of the rail plan, we're looking into, we just mentioned it because it's part of the situation that involves with the mountain rail and so forth, also with UP's commodity movements through the mountains. But yeah, specifically, there's not a direct update for what's going on, other than we are in negotiations with the UP.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Okay, other questions? other comments, Cody? Anything else?
No, sir. I think that's everything for me. Paul or Kay, did you have anything?
Yeah, Kay had to jump off, but if there aren't any more questions, just wanted to say thank you to the STAC for inviting us and providing an opportunity to give an update prior to this plan's approval. As Cody mentioned, here in a week or so with the TC, and then we will have a hopefully a final plan within a few months after that from the FRA. So more to come on this. This is a very fast evolving space in rail, and certainly with the current administration's focus on expanding our rail network, I expect we'll have more to share in this area in the future. So thank you very much.
Well, talking about rail and actuality of the rail actually in motion, and especially in passenger rail, is exciting. We might even see it in my lifetime. So that's a good thing. Thank you guys for your work.
All right, thank you.
Okay, TPR representative report, Dr. Cog.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Board met in January. While very informative, no significant board actions or briefings to report on, but we'll mention Dr. Cog is engaged in conversations related to regional housing needs assessment and state efforts around transit-oriented areas, and then other various housing and land use initiatives. And we'll be developing a transportation housing coordination plan as part of its regional housing efforts. And to report, Mr. Chair, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Central Front Range.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dick Elsner, Central Front Range. We had our meeting in January. Dwayne McFall remained as chair. I remained as vice chair and STAC rep. Other than that, not a lot going on in the mountains right now because it's cold, snowy, and windy. Thank you.
Okay, Eastern TPR.
Yeah, don't have anything really this month new, other than interstate being closed a few times because of storms in Kansas on the eastern border that caused it to where we had to shut it down from Denver because our small towns can't handle that many people backing up in them if we are extended closures. So nothing really new for us.
Thank you. Grand Valley.
We didn't have a board meeting in January, so we don't have a lot to report, but our RFP for our 2050 regional transportation plan is out, due in the middle of February. And then also preparing for February 9th is Colorado Winter Bike to Work Day. So just want to throw that out there so that everybody participates in that and get some fresh air on a cold winter morning. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, so Gunnison Valley. Well, one of the things, as mentioned, is we're all stopped in terms of construction. Now, our main construction in our TPR here is the Little Blue Creek Canyon redo, and it's been 3.5 years so far with all the interruption in traffic, and right now the construction is stopped because of the weather and the snowstorms and things like that. So we have access in both directions for that about 2.5 mile area. And the thing of it is it's close. And they keep saying we're going to finish with this particular project in June. And so, and driving over it just the other day, they are very close. They've got a lot of the things done. They got to come back and do some more repair of the temporary blacktop that they put down, finish up the guardrails, finish up the retaining walls, start doing the striping and the signs. And so we look forward to having that whole project finished in mid-June. Our TPR meeting is going to be next week on the 8th of February, and we're going to start talking about projects for the future. As I said earlier, this is a year of planning, and we have working on our 10-year plan and long-range plan. And so getting everybody geared up and get thinking about new things, because once this major project of the Blue Creek is finished, we have to start thinking about what other projects are undone as yet, and what projects are still in minor repair or looking to be implemented, and that includes Highway 50 and 550, along with 133, which has a lot of landslides and rock slides. And so we'll have to see how that goes. And so we're moving forward. Is Roger on yet? Okay, so that's the Gunnison Valley report. Intermountain.
Thank you, Vince. Intermountain met this January. A couple things that came out of that was the county meetings are being set up by CDOT, and the Intermountain TPR is facilitating that to make sure that the municipalities within those counties are informed of those county meetings. I think that's been a kind of a miss in the past. And so I think those meetings are important, and we want to make sure that they're well attended. We scheduled a retreat for the Intermountain Transportation Planning Region on April 19th. That will be primarily to go over the IGA and the bylaws and make any changes that are necessary for those governing documents. The Intermountain region is moving forward as one region, even though it is being considered to be split up by the Transportation Commission. So I think we decided that it's not a wasted effort to move forward together, because those governing documents could be then used in the case that the TPR is split up. In that retreat, we will be reestablishing voter members and their alternates and providing a process to formalize that. In the past, we've had people show up saying, hey, I represent Carbondale, and there's not any kind of authority that's been given to that person officially by the town of Carbondale. So we want to kind of clean that up. Also, we will be submitting a letter of support for the rail plan. So I really appreciate that update that we just received. That's tremendous. And the Intermountain TPR is fully supportive of that plan and its implementation once it's completed. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. One of the things that Brian mentioned is the county meetings. In Region 3, I know that the county meetings are going to be virtual. So in terms of attendance, that means a lot of people can attend. All you have to do is go into your office and turn on the computer and sign in, and attend, and maybe even contribute a little bit to what our Region 3 people are talking about in terms of projects for our area. Okay, moving on. North Front Range.
Yeah, hi, John Mallow again, MPO chair. We had our last meeting on January 11th, and we heard from CDOT as we usually do, and then we also heard from Front Range Passenger Rail District. We also received an update for the governor's office staff on the upcoming housing legislation. And at the same meeting, we approved the 2023 call for projects for CMAQ, CRP, STBG, and TA funds. That's a total of 12 projects, fully or partially funded, and 10 were waitlisted across the 4 funding pools. Thank you.
Okay, Northwest.
So we had our quarterly meeting, and myself and Brian were nominated, and we will continue on as chair and vice chair. We also voted to stay with our IGA and our MOU. Fraser will now be our town administrator, or our administrator for our TPR. And would like to say thank you to Ginger for over 20 years at the City of Steamboat for her services. CDOT staff gave us a great presentation on the wildlife corridors update and the prioritization study and the partnership with CDOT and CPW. And we also had another CDOT presentation on passing lanes and what that looks like for our region. That is our number one priority in our 10-year plan and long-range plans. I don't suspect that will change very much. Passing lanes, specifically from Craig to Steamboat, and then from Kremling to Steamboat, and then through to Granby and beyond. Our local CDOT engineers told us about the future summer projects, which would include Red Dirt Hill paving and milling from Winter Park to the west, passing lanes, capacity improvements in Fraser, and bridge south of Kremling, shoulder improvements in Kremling, and the 4034 intersection. We also got updates from the west region side, and that would be west of Meeker Bridges on 64. US 40 Steamboat concrete panel replacements are going to start this spring, and Highway 13 and 317 Hamilton South will have a large overlay. And we also will be doing the downhill drive signal on US 40. So with that, Jackson County is excited because we have full CDOT staff this year, which is great for our winter maintenance operations in our region. And our next meeting will not be until April 11th. And I know Brian wanted to say a couple things.
Yeah, obviously everybody in the mountain corridor was affected by the MLK storm. I would say Winter Park probably got the worst of it. Berthoud Pass was closed for 4 days. I have locals up here who've been here 40 years and never seen a pass closure that long, and I understand we can't predict the weather, and that storm just kept coming, and the wind kept on blowing more slides. But it might be time to start looking at what we need to do so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again, because it absolutely paralyzed our community for almost a week during a holiday weekend. So just wanted to put that on the radar.
Okay, so one of the other things, there seems to be a big storm predicted for this weekend. And so, but it's going to affect most of the state, I think. And so I'm not sure how much there's going to be, but it's a pretty big storm that they're predicting. So thanks, guys. Pikes Peak, Holly.
Yes, so not a very long update. We adopted our regional freight study. We have kicked off the active transportation plan. We are excited for several projects, but our big one that I am excited for, the MAMSIP is still going, which is just by Fountain, and then we will be getting ready to do Peterson and Powers and Airport Road. That is the west entrance to Peterson Air Force Base. It's needed to be done for about 10 years and very important to our military community. That's it.
Thanks, Holly. Pueblo area.
Good morning. So we introduced 3 new city council people to our board and welcoming a new mayor today. Wendy Pettit will still continue as our STAC representative, and introducing Greg George. He's our alternate, and he's a deputy director of architecture, engineering, and sustainability for Pueblo County. Just a couple of updates on some of our larger projects here in our area. The I-25 Pueblo roundabout at Drew Dix. The roundabout is fully functional, but they're doing a winter shutdown. But they'll probably do a ribbon cutting probably this spring sometime. And then our large project, the $156 million project, I-25 and the US 50B interchange, they got the final design and they're looking for advertisement this spring. And another it's not a large project, but it was definitely something in the news, and a very notable project was the US 50 and 36 lane. They did some safety improvements, and they're getting those complete, and hopefully that will prevent a lot of accidents happening in that corridor. And that's it for us. Thank you.
Thank you. San Luis Valley.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. We don't have a lot to report. We haven't met yet this year. We'll meet February 22nd. Just dealing with the normal snow that we get in the winter. Thankful that we have snow to take care of. So we'll let you know more after we have our first meeting this year. Thanks.
Okay, South Central.
We had a TPR meeting last Thursday. CDOT's really got a lot of stuff in the mill for South Central, Highway 350 project, Highway 160 East, I-25 bridge replacement in Walsenburg. So there's quite a bit of stuff. A lot of the meeting, as you can expect, was focused on House Bill 1101 and South Central's opposition to being forced into a new transportation planning region. It just seems contrary to what we have in place, and so we are absolutely opposed to that and will continue to be so. And that's about all I have.
Thank you. Southeast.
Yes, good morning. We had our meeting just recently, and just to say the same as John has stated, that we too in the Southeast are opposed to the change that is being proposed for combining us. And really, project-wise, we have Lamar Main Street that has been completed, looks wonderful. We do have our bylaws and our MOUs that are being reviewed and updated. Our chair and our representative stayed the same. Ron Cook will remain as our STAC representative. I'm the alternate, and I will remain the chair. And that's about all we have.
Okay, thank you. Southwest.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Our January meeting, we did not have enough people to have a quorum, so we will have our meeting next week, where we'll be voting in our new chair and vice chair. The only thing that we're really working on is we're in the process of updating our bylaws, and that is all I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Upper Front Range.
Thanks, Vince. A couple exciting things. We got notified by the powers that be that we did qualify and receive the infra grant for our project out by Fort Morgan, their Log Lane Village exit. So we're excited to finally get that. I know Elizabeth and our team have applied for that many times, and so that was exciting to get awarded that and get those changes done to that interchange. Secondly, we've got our 1601 application that will be heard at TC's workshop here in February, and it's on TC's agenda for March, is my understanding. So at possible new interchange right on the border of, Upper Front Range and Dr. Cog there by Hudson. So we don't have a meeting until March. I believe it's March 9th. But that's really all we have going. So pleasure to see everybody today.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, Southern Ute. Ute Mountain. Okay, FHWA.
Hey Vince, this is Bill Haas. I think John Cater may have joined. I'll give John an opportunity if he is on. If he has anything he wants to mention.
John, are you there?
I am. I don't have a whole lot. Bill, I hope you've got something. It's been like so many of the other groups here. It's been kind of quiet over the last 6-8 weeks or so. But Gonna continue. I guess I think the thing coming for this year is going to be a continued emphasis on safety, finding ways we can continue to drive down the fatality numbers and injury numbers. And beyond that, I think continue working with these grants. It's great to hear these success. Like the Morgan County project, the grant there. We got another grant here recently, infra grant on 160 near east of Durango. So we're competing well for grants, and I would encourage everybody to continue to apply for grants, because I think we have great stories to tell here in Colorado, and we can compete well nationally on these nationally competitive grants. But yeah, that's it for me. Bill, have you got anything?
I do. So thanks, John. So building on what John just mentioned, I posted a handful of links in the chat. The first two are kind of navigating all of the funding, the discretionary grant funding opportunities. There's one from USDOT. It's pretty overwhelming. I think it's very easy to kind of just throw up your hands and say, wow, there's way too much. So there is some attempt to try to provide more detail on some of these. And that first one, I believe, is that first one I think is a searchable thing. There's also the second one, which I'll talk about now, is FHWA. It's a dashboard that you can kind of search on opportunity grant funding opportunities. And then I posted a couple links to some recent success that we've had, some discretionary grant announcements where Colorado is receiving some funding. I think that's probably the last month or so. It was just mentioned the two infra grants on I-76 and down on US 160, and then there's the other two are related to electric vehicle charging infrastructure funding that we have received. So you may want to look at those if you're interested, and just kind of see where we are. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us. That's all I have, Vince.
Thanks. FTA.
Good morning. This is Emma Belmont with Federal Transit Administration. The only thing I have, and I wasn't going to say anything, but thanks, Bill, for reminding me. We do expect to see 5339 bus and bus facilities and lower no emissions grant NOFOs come out probably sometime this February. So keep an eye out if you have any transit projects that look to that competitive source for funds. And nothing else for me today. Thanks.
Thanks. Bill Haas talked about all these grants, and one of the things I attended yesterday was a little session on tax credits. One of the things that was difficult is unless you file a tax return, tax credits don't work. But now they've changed the law a little bit so you can get direct pay or effective payment. And so people who are interested in getting some sort of credit for some of their projects should look into that, because it would be better to get some money rather than let it set aside because I can't file a tax return. So, and just a little comment. I don't know too much about it, but it looked interesting. Anybody else that I've missed? Okay, I'd go to a break, but it's a little early, so let's go to the legislative report. Emily and Jamie, excuse me.
Jamie, do you want to go first? I'm going to switch to my computer.
Jamie?
Yeah, I don't think Jamie is on today. So I think it's just Emily.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry, I'm not on screen. I'm just jumping around today, but great to see everyone. So we are now several weeks into session. It's already been moving very, very quickly. There's been a remarkable amount of transportation bills that have been introduced. The two I really want to highlight are the CDOT specific agency bills that have been introduced so far. So one is SB 24-100, and that is commercial vehicle highway safety measures. So that creates or changes the geographic location where CDOT has the authority to require CMVs to carry chains. It also allows the department to establish heightened speed limit enforcement zone in Glenwood Canyon, and makes it a traffic offense for CMVs to be driving in the farthest left lane on I-70 between Glenwood Springs and Morrison, except to safely pass. It also has a few other provisions, including tasking us with studying potential new chain-up stations. So that is one that originated with the department. A lot of the, if not almost all of the West Slopes legislators have signed on as co-sponsors for that. We do know that there's amendments to come to kind of work out some of the fine parts of the language, but we're continuing to have conversations with the truckers. And that has been introduced, but has not been calendared yet for a committee date. I also did notice it might be, I think you guys would be interested that CML put in a amend position that I'm going to investigate today to kind of understand where they're coming from and what they're looking to amend as well. The other agency bill that has been introduced that is one of CDOT's priorities is SB 24065. That is mobile electronic devices and motor vehicle driving. So that bill prohibits the use of mobile electronic devices for all drivers. So currently in Colorado, there's only a hands-free law for drivers under 18. So it expands that law to all drivers. That has been introduced, and the committee date is February 12th. So you'll see CDOT supporting that and testifying in support. Some other notable bills, SB 24091, rights of way permits for broadband deployment. This is a bill that we will be opposing. I'm sure a lot of you have been tracking our year of back and forth with trying to establish a fee structure for access to the right of way for broadband deployment. We did successfully create a fee structure in December, and this bill kind of undoes all of the work that we've spent the past year doing, which was also the directive of the legislature. So we have a lot of different problems with that bill and are planning to testify. Other than that, there's a lot of the TLRC bills that have been introduced that I've mentioned before: child passenger safety and education, methods to increase the use of transit, vulnerable road user protection enterprise. Those are all ones we haven't formally taken a position on. And then a few other safety bills have also been introduced that such as authorizing motorcycle lane filtering, possessing identification while driving, which allows drivers to present a digital license instead of a physical license. And then we also had our first official highway designation of the year, which was the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Highway on US 36 between mile marker 32 and 37. So those are my main updates, but happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Emily?
I have a comment or an ask. As the legislative session continues to ramp up, is there a possibility or a avenue for us to get more than just a monthly update on what is forthcoming when it comes to transportation bills? Is there a way to have you send a kind of a summary of the week's happening or what's forthcoming, somehow weekly or some way? I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out how we can stay on top of this stuff as it becomes more pressing, if there needs to be some sort of press or we need to be informed.
Yeah, I'll defer to Herman on that one and see if other ways to navigate this through the legislature.
Yeah, I would just say if we're already doing something for either staff or commission, like if we're gonna if we do a weekly report, I think it's fine to send the weekly report to the commission. I'm not sure that we do that every week, just because Emily's probably at 60 or 70 hours a week. So I don't want to ask her to do,
Right.
the more reporting she does, the less lobbying she's able to do, because there's only so much time in the day. But I think it's fair that if we're producing something like that already, I think it's fine to send it to commission or to STAC. Sure.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? We're moving quite along pretty well. So given that, let's take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and get Darius on the horn here. Okay, back at 9:55. Okay, it's time to get back, guys. Okay, statewide planning lessons learned. Darius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As kind of a kickoff to our statewide planning process, we wanted to review what went well and what didn't go well with the last planning process as we're putting together the plans for the plan, so to speak, starting with this late spring into the summer, and wanted to just talk specifically with STAC on ways we can improve from last time. We do have a couple of slides that Marissa is going to go through, and we'll stop at each major point from that report that was conducted about 3 or 4 years ago. Marissa, you'll have to correct me on the exact timing of that and see if there's any specific items from members of the STAC on specific feedback on ways we can improve that, whether it's public outreach. I think there's a branding question, the development of the regional plans, and kind of have an open conversation with staff that will help us develop our plans going forward. Just as a kind of a overall timeline, the actual statewide plan is due in August of 2025, and that will lay out the needs and the overall goals that for Colorado over the next 20 years. And then afterwards, we'll be taking a look at the 10-year plan, especially once the next 4-year portion of the 10-year plan expires at the end of fiscal year 26. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Marissa, and she's going to walk through some of the intro slides and go through each items, and we'll open it up for comments and questions.
Thanks,
Okay,
Darius.
one of the things before Marissa jumps in is the fact that the last long-range plan, the 2045 plan, was very thorough in its gathering of information from all over the state. And hopefully we can do a very good plan this next time also because of the lessons learned. Marissa.
Thanks, Vince. Yeah, exactly. I think we always set a goal for ourselves to be even better than the last plan and find ways to improve. So definitely love to start this off by thinking of ways that we can make the 2050 plan even better than the 2045 plan. If you want to go to the next slide. So like Darius mentioned, at the conclusion of each statewide transportation planning process, we evaluate, the process to see what went well and where improvements might be made in the future. So we adopted our 2045 in August of 2020. So this lessons learned assessment was conducted shortly after that. Before I go to my next slides, just, again, want to reiterate that this is a lessons learned presentation. So while Vince also has mentioned that this next year or 2 years are going to be pretty heavily focused on planning, I think it often helps by first starting to look back so that we can be mindful about the best practices and lessons learned from the past that can help us shape our future planning initiatives. You want to go to the next slide. So how did we do this lessons learned process? We had a couple different strategies using surveys and interviews to identify what worked well and what could be improved. We interviewed STAC and sent out surveys to STAC, NPO, TPR chairs and representatives. We talked with our federal agency partners and of course CDOT headquarters and region staff participated in this as well. We asked questions about, just general input on the process. We talked about, the modal and plan integration, public and stakeholder input, the development of our 10-year plan, which was brand new at the time. And then, the final deliverables of all the plans together holistically, which included the development of our statewide and long-range transportation plans, our statewide and regional transit plans. We developed project fact sheets for each of the 10-year plan projects. We also had quarter profiles and an online story map. So all of that we tried to get some feedback on. want to go to the next slide? So starting with some of the successful outcomes, we heard a lot that people really liked the effective grassroots outreach and outreach tools. Luckily, we did the outreach in 2019 because had we waited for 2020, our outreach would have looked a whole lot different. But we really tried to hit the road in 2019, attending outreach events, fun activities around the state where it drew in the general public, various festivals, things like that. We also had a public survey that we launched that people could fill out at those events, as well as an online interactive map where people could drop pins on different roadways or things around the state to tell us their feedback, where they were observing maybe unsafe things, or tell us about, where they would like to see more transit, things like that. We had social media campaigns, we did telephone town halls, and then we also tried to put more of an emphasis on Spanish language outreach. Another successful outcome that we heard was the stakeholder engagement. We attended community events, but we also tried to meet with different stakeholder groups that you helped us identify to get their perspectives, whether it be freight, transit, active transportation. We try to meet with different stakeholder groups to engage with us as part of the process. Plan integration is a huge part. A statewide plan has to cover a lot of ground. So we try to look at how we could complete plans simultaneously. So the 2045 plan marked the first time where we developed the transit plan in lockstep with the statewide plan, so that we could have consistent messaging and talk about multimodal transportation together in one conversation. I would say number 4 is really important, the creation of the 10-year plan. This was not something we had prior to the 2045 planning process. It was the first time that we embarked to put our vision that we put forth in the 2045 plans and regional plans into a 10-year list of projects that would serve to get us to that strategic vision. So I think over 70% of the surveys showed that people strongly agreed that the 10-year plan was a very useful document. And then we also heard that people appreciated the coordination with CDOT commission and committees, such as obviously the Transportation Commission, STAC, the Transit and Rail Advisory Committee track. That was viewed positively. Darius.
So sorry. Yeah, no. So let's go back to that previous slide. So let's open it out before we go to some of the lessons learned items. Is there any questions that folks have about these 5 areas? Because we think these were the strong points of the last planning cycle. Or if there is any further comment that members of STAC want to provide on these, or critiques, but based off of our interviews and the surveys, these were the top 5, but wanted to open that up to see if anybody had any comments on these before we go into the lessons learned.
Heather.
I guess I think you guys did a fantastic job with all 5 of these. But in the same respect, I would love to know, I don't know if this is just me, but what is the budget when it comes to doing something like this, and as much as the outreach and the staff involvement and what that looks like? Because I think some of it was a little excessive, and maybe that's me personally, but I think sometimes it felt like there was some overlap during the last planning process, and I would love to know if we're keeping our eye on the spending limits and what this looks like, and as much as doing this in-house versus consultants versus travel versus, thankfully, you're right, Marissa, we're in the Zoom world, so a lot of this can be a little bit more efficient and economical, but I applaud the success. I also am concerned about the spend.
Yeah, so I would say, the budget for the 2045 plan, because we leveraged it with the transit plan, was a huge savings over, I think, previous plan efforts. And I know while we're still scoping, I think this is we're still very early in the pre-planning, so we don't really have a full budget or scope developed yet. But I know that we're trying to do as much as we can in-house with the strong teams, both at headquarters and in the regions. But I think as we scope it out, we might use some selective consultants just for some behind the scenes work where we just don't have enough bandwidth. But I think that's still sort of to be determined. But I don't know if you want to add to that, Darius.
No, that's a good item on there. I think we do get my division gets paid out of statewide planning and research funds from FHWA, which is essentially designed for this work. I will commend Marissa's team previously that effort, while you know there are some costs, but that was significantly lower than the previous iterations of the statewide plan, and the consultant usage was selective. And agreed, we want to be able to, I think most of the time is going to be spent on, you know, the highest cost is going to be spent on, you know, employee time, which it is a normal part of doing business. There may be some travel costs and selective online meetings where possible, since we have a lot of the tools such as Zoom, Google Meet, whatever the case may be, and a lot of integration of the electronic tools as well. If there is some heavier data analysis that that staff cannot do, then that's where we may look at specific help. But we really want the staff to be out there and working with it. And also with the plan integration, we know there's the transit plan that's going out right now. There's the safety, statewide highway safety plan that's going out right now, wanting to make sure that we go out with a consistent message and get a holistic view of the transportation system, because folks don't think of items in a silo with like bike and ped and highways and transit, and making sure that our groups are coordinated as best as possible with that. So hopefully both Marissa and I's answers your question, Heather.
Okay, from my perspective, I think the creation of the 10-year plan was one of the major steps in the development of this last long-range plan. Now, while we never had an official 10-year plan, we were always looking at what are we doing in the next 10 years, because people can't see 25 years out there. And so they can never see their project coming to a place where they're going to actually see it built and stuff like that. So a 10-year focus is really important for people, because they can see that, and they can see that their planning and their efforts are really coming to fruition. And so I think the creation of the 10-year plan was one of the major things that was developed.
And Vince, I would add on to that we want to, barring any major changes, that I agree with the comments on there. And we do have the 10-year plan broken up into 4-year segments to allow us to be flexible for changing changes in short-term changes if need be. One of the big ones was the introduction of the greenhouse gas planning standard, which made some modifications to the 10-year plan at that kind of at the end of that first 4 years. The basic framework of that is planned to be continued into the next cycle, and we can provide some tweaks to the process as well, and in order to make it better, more transparent, and identify the key needs throughout the state.
Okay, other comments? Okay, moving ahead, Marissa.
Okay, let's go on. Yeah. So some opportunity areas based on the feedback we received. I sort of broke these into different categories, and we'll pause after each slide to talk about them. But the first kind of centered around branding, and then our public outreach. Related to branding, some of the feedback we got was the brand did not include CDOT anywhere in here, and made internet searches difficult. That there's a picture of the logo that we developed for the 2045 planning process. It was branded as Your Transportation Plan, Connection Choice, Colorado for All. So want to hear from you if we should consider new branding that would be used consistently throughout the process. And then on to public outreach. We heard that we should continue to find ways to bring in new voices to the planning process. Again, continue to engage in meaningful conversations with historically underrepresented populations. While we did try to up our Spanish outreach in the 2045 planning process, I think we could go further. So we heard to, continue to find ways to ensure that all of our documents are available in both English and Spanish. So some initial ideas we have to make the public outreach even stronger is to do an early development of a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan, which would be a plan to guide our branding and public outreach strategies. So Aaron Willis on my team, the statewide and regional planning section manager, is working closely with Marsha Nelson in the equity office to do this sort of at the very onset before we even really kick off the official plan. So I think having this in place will, again, just really guide us to making sure that we're being very thoughtful and inclusive in our planning. Another thing that we're doing is national scans for engagement best practices. There's also legislation now that not only makes us continue to have documents available in multiple languages, but to be ADA compliant with readability and accessibility standards. So that is something we'll need to do throughout the 2050 planning process as well. I'll pause there, see if Darius wants to add anything, or if we have any questions or further feedback.
Nothing to add on there, but appreciate if folks have any comments, because this will help us outline the plan. When we come back in spring, we want to take these comments so that way we can outline what we plan to do with this going forward. So that will give us some feedback in the next few months on, the brand, we could change it to, we want yellow instead of green, those types of things. So we appreciate any comments that you have on these next few slides going forward. And I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Gary.
Yeah, just I think we could stay with your transportation plan and just add CDOT to it. I think sometimes we try to change brands too much. I think we need to try to get consistency so people know what it is and where it's headed, and and not always coming out with something that feels entirely new. Because a lot of this will be updates to what has been planned for the last 20 years, and just improving and adding new changes that are needed. So I don't think we need to do a whole rebranding, plus the cost and time factor that takes to do that, and all the artwork and everything. So I think trying to stay consistent helps reduce cost and staff time that's needed for that, and it can focus more on the actual plan itself. So
thank you.
So one of the things I see with your transportation plan is an identification that the fact that the public has a stake in this plan, that it's their plan. A lot of times when people start to contribute to certain particular things, if people aren't listening, then it becomes a CDOT plan, okay? And people really get their hackles up in terms of fighting against that. But if we say it's your plan, then they're more invested in what they do and more interested in providing comments because they think they're being listened to, which they are. And so that's an important factor, is to make this plan their plan and not just something that some organization says, here it is, go for it.
Thanks, Vince.
I think, John, you have a comment in the chat?
Yeah, it's just a comment for you guys to consider later on. We don't need to take time with a huge discussion.
Okay.
Other comments?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, go ahead.
Just other comments.
Any comments on the public outreach process? We did extensive outreach to all 64 counties. We had in-person events, we had telephone town halls, we had surveys, we had the mapping tool, which I thought was a neat tool, but wanted to see what folks had thought about that outreach process previously, and see if there's ways to improve or new ideas that we can consider.
Okay. Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darius, I may have missed it. Any plans to work directly with the cities and counties directly in there? And win, lose, or draw, I'd certainly offer up my department and the city and county of Denver's assistance with doing any sort of that outreach. And I think specifically around that, the disadvantaged communities, we've done a lot of work on that, and certainly would be happy to work with Ms. Nelson on leveraging any of those contacts.
I think that's a good suggestion. Marissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did talk to a lot of counties out there, and happy to talk with cities as well, knowing that there are a lot more municipalities than counties. But I think that's something that we can definitely take a look at working on. But with the caveat that it may be some overlap with our DRCOG partners, so they have their own regional transportation plan as well.
I love those folks too. So happy to help however we can.
So I think what happened in the last plan is the fact that you got people at the meetings to actually talk about the plan. You know, previous to this particular plan, you used to have like open houses and you had charts and all kinds of things, and you get 4 people in the whole area to come and look at it. Well, now with this last plan, you had a lot of people there. You had the county commissioners, you had the public, you have lots of stuff. So you got more input than you have in the previous plan, and how it was approached. So something that brings people together to talk about what their views and needs are. Gary.
Yeah, Darius asked about the mapping tool. I do think that was useful for the surveying, that people could click on and make comments about certain segments of road on the state system. And then reference back to your transportation plan. I like that title. I think it's good because it does tie the people into it. I do think we need to get the CDOT in there because it is the state highway system, or the state transportation system that's ran by the state, that's being looked at, and how it integrates with all the locals. And that's something we always need to focus on, is making sure people understand the different layers of our transportation system. We have the state system, and then we have all the city and county systems that tie and integrate together. So I think we need to make sure we keep that highlighted, that this is the state plan that integrates with all the local stuff. So people can understand those differences and continue to educate people on the different layers of our transportation system.
I like that. You got a thumbs up from John too.
Okay, so one of the things is, you know, the whole idea is your coming together moves us forward. And so by drawing the people in, we can have a successful transportation plan.
Exactly. Well, I'll move us along, but keep thinking about these things. There'll be space at the end for a sort of a anything and everything conversation, but let's move on to so some other opportunity areas. I think this segues nicely from some of the comments we received on the public engagement, but one opportunity area is MPO TPR engagement. We heard how important it is to coordinate early on how to integrate the required elements into the planning process, ensure we're meeting all of our federal and state planning requirements. And then we also heard that it's, MPOs obviously have their own state and federal requirements for developing their own plans and have a lot of staff and funding to do so. But the TPR, since we work closely, CDOT works closely with the TPRs to develop their own transportation plans. We heard that it's important to, still allow for the TPRs to customize their plans, include different elements in their plans. So we definitely want to create that opportunity again and this planning process. And part of our interest in coming to you before we have a scope, all this fully scoped out, is to hear from you what you want to see. And then of course continue to coordinate with both the MPOs and TPRs on public outreach. Stakeholder engagement, similarly, we want your input, and we heard from you last time to continue to get your input on stakeholder, how to integrate stakeholder input into the overall planning process. We use that to inform the statewide plan, but it's also equally important to you guys as to inform your regional plans. So want to be partners with you in that, and especially in identifying key stakeholder groups, establishing what their role will be, and then of course sharing any input that we hear from them with you. Thoughts or comments on MPO, TPR coordination, or stakeholder engagement?
So, like I said, appreciate any comments that folks have, because this will help us outline what the next year and a half is going to look like as we put these together. And we want to be able to have a plan put together before we go out and do a lot of these items. So if there's any thoughts on, last time this was great, we want to continue doing that, or if we need to change something up a little bit, would appreciate those comments, because this will help us get that ready and inform some of those conversations that we'll have in the next couple of months, particularly on this coordination piece, because we want to continue the coordination and get those specific those regional TPR plans right, and reflect the needs of each area of the state.
I guess I'll chime in and say, I think you guys did a great job. I think what we all face as the TPR and MPO chairs is, ignorance from the public of what this is, how it works, and we can send slide decks till the cows come home, but there's still going to be an obvious misunderstanding of what this is and how it will affect the everyman or even our electeds. It's really hard to continue to convey the same message over and over again. I feel like we are the definition of insanity sometimes at STAC. But I think the reality is if you're looking at coordination and how this looks, the biggest benefit would be to really break it down even further than we all think it needs to be, because there's still such great misunderstanding of what planning's documents do, how the process works, and what it means for your local communities. I would stress that time and again before we even go into this, if there's some way, even through the county meeting process, to continue to convey the message of this plan will do this. This is not your, key to getting your project done. This is very broad stroked. And I don't know how to give that information any more than we already have, but some sort of creative way to let the light bulbs finally come on with the electeds would be huge.
Yeah, Gary Beatty, one of the things is surveys that we use. A couple of surveys I've seen recently come out seem to be a little bit leading in where they're asking the questions, and then they combine things. One of the most recent was freight and passenger rail. They're kind of two separate things, but they were lumped together in one question. And I think we need to be careful as we do surveys, reach out to the TPRs especially, to kind of make sure that we're asking the questions in a way that can give us good, meaningful feedback and good public sentiment feeling, so we know how the public is feeling about different things and how we balance all the competing needs of our transportation system between transit and rail and bike and ped, and then the highways, which are what everybody thinks of when we think of the state highway system. So even air traffic. So making sure we don't lump too many things into single questions and surveys that we do, and make sure we spend enough time and split out the surveys enough to get true sentiment of the people on what they support, don't support, and things. So just something to be cognizant of as we move forward with surveys coming out of CDOT, making sure we're not leading the decision or how the questions are being asked, that we get a response that may not be the true support of the people, or people willing to actually use what they say they might want to use. Will they actually use it and change modes? So just trying to make sure we get honest feedback from the people, and we're not trying to lead to an answer that people still are not going to use.
Yeah, so one of the things about surveys is you have to ask yourself when you read the question, what are you going to do with the answer? And what kind of answers do you expect? If you're not going to do anything with it, and the answers don't mean anything, then why ask the question? So you're really trying to get into some meaningful responses so that you can actually do something with the answers. Dana.
Yeah, I think along that line, as we've been like doing the RFP for our long range plan, we've talked a lot about just, I feel like we spent a lot of time collecting like the needs, like where's the issues, what are your, where do you see as problem areas? And then we use all that, and then we don't do as much work in like presenting the solutions and getting people's feedback on the solutions. And I think sometimes it's hard for me, like when you just have a blank map that's just like, tell us everything, and you're trying to think like, okay, what areas are there issues? And so I do think that there could be some opportunities to like present the projects that are planned as part of that, or somehow integrate like what is already in the plan, and is there like, are we missing anything, instead of just doing like always a blank slate. And then I think the other thing is like, there's a lot of surveys out there. So sometimes people get tired of doing the same survey, like where are the needs? So trying to use maybe things that have already been done also to inform that, instead of asking like the same questions over and over again by different organizations.
Hey, Eva.
Well, just kind of piggyback on that, maybe even have a section within the plan saying like, this is what we heard from you, and these are the projects that actually took place because of the outreach that we did. That might be helpful, at least, because then people will be like, oh, okay, they did listen to us and they are taking that into account.
I really like that. And that is something that I think we can continue to build on. One of the things, that we built when we did the project fact sheets for the 10-year plan is we had like a section that said like, what is the urgent need? And then a section that said what we heard. And then we try to say like, and how does this project address this urgent need and what we heard? But I definitely agree. It's a not only like, what else do we need, but look what we heard just 4 years ago and what we've done to address that. So I really appreciate that feedback.
And I would also add to add on to some of the questions is one of the things that's happening right now is a statewide survey to help our travel demand model, which is one of the key components of our greenhouse gas planning rule, but can be helpful because we do want to use actual data of the system. We have a lot of data that we collect here, probably even more that that could help feed into that. So we hear that this section of roadway is not great, and we see on our data that it's rated poor. Being able to help tell that story. So that's one of the areas that we're able to do that. In fact, I may ask my deputy director to maybe give a presentation on that survey as well, because that's kind of ongoing right now, working with real people on how they travel throughout the state. It might be a good item as we get into this, but I just wanted to add that quick thought. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so one of the things that I've seen over the multiple long-range plans is transit has always been a second child. It comes in at the end for some reason. Well, I think transit could be a connecting factor in terms of bringing people together. And I mean that literally, bring people together through transit. Now, how are you going to get transit to all the places? Highways, other types of things. They all connect together. And so one of the things is we need to also highlight transit in our statewide plan and how we're going to move people, not only by cars, but also by other kinds of vehicles in terms of transit. Right now we're working on trains, but I think there's still a lot of room for transit, and we've taken transit a long way forward by having Bustang Outrider, Pegasus, and the various other kinds of transit that our department has brought together. So we should make that a more focused thing on how we come together with transit.
I completely agree, Chair. It is your transportation plan, not your highway plan. So totally agree. And I think it's going to be a even more important element, especially with some of these other initiatives that have come along. And also where there are gaps that can help get people where they need to go safely with the mode of choice and provide more options to folks. Absolutely agree.
Exactly. Other comments?
Let's go to the next slide. Continue the discussion. So a couple other opportunity areas. One, performance-based planning. So we heard a lot that how critical it is to identify goal areas, objectives, and targets earlier in the planning process. Having those developed up front will guide not only our investment decisions, but help us prioritize projects in the long term and over the course of the 10-year plan. We also heard, again, not having program distribution and long-range revenue projections. They were done sort of as we were developing the plans, but if we had them done earlier in the process, people felt that it wouldn't have felt so rushed and perhaps at times disorganized as we were talking projects and priorities. So this is something we did as staff really take to heart. We had lots of conversations with you last year about the formula programs, part of program distribution. We'll be bringing long-range revenue projections to you in March, as well as start engaging with you about our policy directive 14. That is our the performance measures that guide our statewide planning. PD 14 establishes our goal areas, our objectives and targets. We had anticipated starting that discussion this month, but we moved that to March just so we could be more in alignment with the Transportation Commission. But that is something that we want to do with you upfront and early. Somewhat related to that is our data approach. We heard, and I just have to, we had an intern who's now a permanent employee. I have to give a shout out to Jan Chalist. He created literally thousands of maps for us. Just crank them out. And so if you were part of the process back in 2019, we had a roadshow of so many maps that we just put in a PowerPoint presentation and tried to get your feedback. And I think it was a great way to visualize a lot of data together, but we heard that, well, wouldn't it be great if we could develop just maybe more of a tool that could be perhaps online and interactive that shows all this data together. You can turn layers on and off instead of having to make thousands of maps and toggle through them. So, I think it's really important that we have data-driven discussions. This allows for us to have informed conversations and prioritize projects based on data. So one of our ideas in this vein is we did a lot of work, and you guys saw a lot of that work when, for the House Bill 1101 TPR boundary study, where we made an online map that showed a lot of different data that was required by the legislation. So it was a ton of work that we did in a short amount of time, but I think that this tool can be repurposed or something similar created to use this effort in the NPOs, TPRs, our public outreach at large to show a variety of data trends, layers related to safety, asset management needs, transit, all these things that create a multimodal system. Pause here and open it up to thoughts and questions.
Other comments?
Mr. Chair, I wanted to highlight something in the chat from Ava. Absolutely, we totally agree. I think this fits well with this performance-based planning and what we can do with safety, and that's why we want to have integration with our as we develop our safety plan. The safety plan, I think it's the state highway safety plan, is a federally required plan, but being able to leverage the items that come with that into the statewide planning process would be a helpful going forward, especially since we're aligned with doing both of them at the same time would be helpful. So I definitely agree. And in order to get back to the levels that we saw in 2010 with or even better in regards to highway and transportation safety and reverse the trends that we saw the last couple of years.
Eva.
So I do have one suggestion. When I went to AMPO last year, there was a presentation that I heard. It was a county, they did a transportation, they did their long range transportation plan. And what they did is they had what they called it their transportation atlas. And it's just basically a very condensed version of their transportation plan, but it has a lot of graphics. So even though our transportation plans can be really thick and full of just a bunch of data, this atlas that she had shown has just a lot of different graphics for the everyday user. And I thought that was really cool and helpful, and maybe something that we might try to integrate when we update our long range transportation plan. But that might be something really helpful for CDOT too, to just have, and I can share it sometime, hopefully, with the headquarters just to show, because I have this document and it's really cool. But it, like I said, it just has a bunch of different graphics and just maps of just things of what's going on. And it's very user friendly, especially for people, everyday people who are looking at it, transportation planners. We like to get in the weeds, but people who maybe not know a lot of stuff with maybe our elected officials, that might be a useful tool to share, so that it's something that's easy, user friendly, and that you can digest it a little bit easier. That's just a suggestion, but if you guys are interested, I can definitely share that document I got from AMPO.
Yeah, please share. We'd love to see some examples of that.
So thinking about PD 14 engenders a what if scenario. If I improve this area, am I sacrificing another area? And that's what we want to avoid. How do we improve a particular area without sacrificing another area? And so to bring everything up rather than bringing one down and one up. Gary.
Yeah, on the data approach, I think if there could be coordinated meetings with the TPRs that as we get kind of into the process on, prioritizing where we want to try to allocate resources, I think being able, if you could have that brought up on a big screen where questions of the group could bring up, say, traffic counts on different corridors to help prioritize where we want to try to do things. And some of those, if you could do a live type deal that's facilitated with staff to work through some of those questions that a TPR may have on trying to prioritize where we do things and have that available. I think a lot of times we have places we could meet that would have the technology available. So I think that would be a useful tool to use during the process.
Other comments? Okay, Marissa, moving forward.
Let's go on. The last area that we wanted to highlight is plan integration. We heard feedback about modal, functional, and topical plan integration in the statewide plan, that we should really look to build on the success of the transit integration in the 2045 planning process, and that we should establish a process for integrating these modal, functional, and topical plans early. You know, we heard that, I think we heard this comment today as well, that people get survey fatigue. There's fatigue when you try to, you know, do too much outreach and engagement in silos for different modes and different things related to transportation. So to the extent possible, if we can do planning for the, you know, things all together that will inform all of the efforts, I think that that is a win. So just looking at how we can be really mindful about integrating plans. So we do anticipate, you know, building on the success of the transit integration from last time. You know, I think the stars are aligning in some ways with, I think a lot of different MPOs are updating their active transportation plans right now. So that is one of the areas we want to go a little bit further with. Maybe in this plan is transit, active transportation, integration, of course, safety. I think Eva, you made that comment, asset management. And I think one of the ways that we can best integrate all these different needs and priorities together is aligning it with the work that we'll be doing soon to update PD 14. And again, just trying to align it with our goals, objectives, and targets. So, and then using data to help us guide those prioritization and decisions. So I'll pause there.
Any comments?
If I could, Mr. Chair, I will note that we'll try to integrate as much as possible, especially with plans that have some, you know, that we've already mentioned. Some of these plans have already been done because of the timelines that we needed to meet to submit them to the federal highways. But of course, with those already published plans, the asset management plan being one of them, we want to take some of the principles that are already identified and be able to integrate that into our planning process. But where we have areas of alignment and where we can align our public outreach process, we want to make sure that we have one unified voice and being able to have look at the transportation system as a whole and not have what we had experienced in the past where some of the stuff may have been an afterthought. I think that was one of the comments we hear. All modes should be considered when we take a look at what we want to do over the next 10 years and the vision for the next 20 years as well.
Comments? Suggestions? Okay, Marissa.
All right, well, I think, you know, this sort of just, we've had open discussion throughout, and I'm glad we did. But if there's any other comments that you would like to make, you know, love to hear what you'd like to see continued. If you have any further ideas for any of the opportunity areas that we discussed, please feel free to share them. You don't have to share them, you know, today. We're still scoping. So, you know, always feel free to reach out to me or the team directly, or have conversations with your MPOs and TPRs, and we can take your feedback that way. But, you know, more to come, and just want to say thank you. We value your input as we scope this out, and again, just looking forward to working with you to make 2050 an even better statewide plan.
I think that was a good discussion. Okay, Darius, anything else?
No, I think appreciate Marissa putting that together and having the conversation. We appreciate the feedback that everyone has given us today. If there's anything additional, happy to have that. We're going to continue to have conversations all throughout the next couple of months, starting with PD 14 next month. Plan to do it this month, but we're a little bit behind, so you'll have to forgive us for that. But look forward to that conversation of setting those goals out early. And I hope, I was just out traveling in the short time I've been in this position, traveling for the greenhouse gas roadmap. But happy to go out and see folks again. So hopefully, as much as my boss will allow, but I don't think he's going to say no to the important effort of making sure that we are coordinated and getting everything that you have on there. So appreciate it, and look forward to conversations with TPRs and local governments, and future conversations here at STAC as well.
Okay. Other business. There's comments about getting more information about legislation, and there's a website there at the bottom of your agenda that leads you to the Legislative Review Committee that may lead you to one of the bills that you're interested in. So there's one aspect there. Our next meeting is on March 7. So it seems late in the month, but it's the first Thursday. So anything else to be brought before the STAC? Well, hearing none, then I'll consider ourselves adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vince.